I'm Margaret, 68 years old, and I thought I knew what family meant. 3 summers ago, my beloved husband passed away, leaving me to navigate the choppy waters of blended family dynamics alone. We'd been married for only 3 years, but those were the happiest years of my life after my first husband died decades earlier. Now sitting in our lake house in upstate New York, watching my step-grandson Timothy splash in the water, I felt that familiar ache of trying to belong. My late husband had built a successful tech company from nothing, and I'd stood by his side through every challenge. This annual family reunion was supposed to bring us closer together, but something felt different this year. My daughter-in-law Jennifer seemed more distant than usual, her smiles never quite reaching her eyes. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe if you enjoy stories about family respect and unexpected revelations. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens next at this seemingly peaceful family gathering. The morning sun cast golden ripples across Lake George as I stood on the wraparound porch of our family retreat, breathing in the crisp mountain air. This place had been in my late husband's family for 25 years, and now it belonged to me. Every July, we'd gather here for 2 weeks of swimming barbecues and what I hoped would be memory-making moments. This year felt especially important because Timothy was 8, now old enough to really appreciate the traditions his grandfather had started. I'd spent weeks preparing for this reunion, just like I did every year since becoming a widow. The guest bedrooms were perfectly appointed with fresh linens and wildflowers from the garden. The pantry was stocked with everyone's favorite foods, from Robert's preferred organic coffee to Timothy's beloved chocolate chip cookies that I'd learned to bake from scratch. I'd even arranged for the boat to be serviced and ready for afternoon fishing trips. My son-in-law, Robert, 42, and looking more like his father every year, arrived first with his family. He gave me his usual warm hug, but I noticed how Jennifer, 38, and always impeccably put together, offered only a brief, obligatory embrace. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a sleek ponytail, and her designer athleisure outfit probably cost more than most people spent on groceries in a month. Timothy bounded up the porch steps with the unbridled energy that only 8-year-olds possess. His sandy brown hair caught the sunlight, and his gap-toothed grin made my heart swell with love. This little boy had become the center of my world after his grandfather died. We shared a special bond built on bedtime stories, Saturday morning pancakes, and countless hours of his endless questions about everything from why the sky was blue to how airplanes stayed in the air. The first few days passed in their usual rhythm. I prepared elaborate breakfasts while everyone else slept and set up beach chairs by the water and orchestrated activities that would bring us together. Jennifer participated with polite enthusiasm, but I couldn't shake the feeling that she was merely going through the motions. When I suggested teaching Timothy to make his grandfather's famous fish batter, she quickly interjected that Timothy wasn't interested in cooking. When I offered to take him into town for ice cream, she reminded me that he had dietary restrictions I wasn't aware of. Each small rejection felt like a paper cut, minor individually, but cumulatively painful. I found myself walking on eggshells, second-guessing every suggestion and offer of help. Robert seemed oblivious to the underlying tension caught up in his work calls, and completely missing the subtle ways his wife was building walls between Timothy and me. During our traditional evening card games, I noticed how Jennifer would subtly redirect Timothy's attention away from me whenever he got too excited about sharing something with his grandmother. When he wanted to sit next to me during movie night, she'd create reasons for him to sit elsewhere. When he asked me to read him a bedtime story like Grandpa used to do, she'd intervene with excuses about his bedtime routine. The most painful moments came when Timothy would start a sentence with "Grandma Margaret and I," only to be interrupted by his mother with some urgent task or reminder that pulled his attention away. I watched our special connection being systematically undermined, and I felt powerless to stop it without causing a scene that would ruin everyone's vacation. I spent sleepless nights in my bedroom staring at the family photos on the dresser. There was my late husband holding baby Timothy, both of them grinning at the camera. There were pictures from last year's vacation, everyone looking genuinely happy. Had I imagined the warmth in those moments? Was I holding on to something that had never really existed? My husband had always been the bridge between his son's family and me. He had a natural way of making everyone feel included and valued. Without him, I was struggling to find my place in this family dynamic. I'd tried so hard to fill the void he left behind to be the grandmother figure Timothy deserved, but maybe I was overstepping boundaries I didn't even know existed. The lake house, which had always felt like a sanctuary, began to feel more like a stage where I was performing a role that nobody wanted me to play. Every generous gesture felt awkward, every attempt at connection seemed forced, and I couldn't understand what had changed. These were the same people who had welcomed me into their family 3 years ago, who had celebrated holidays with me, who had seemed genuinely glad to have me as part of their lives. As I prepared dinner each evening, I could hear the easy laughter and conversation flowing from the living room, but somehow it felt like it was happening behind glass. I was present but not truly included, welcomed but not entirely wanted. The realization was breaking my heart in ways I hadn't anticipated when I'd looked forward to this family time for months. On Thursday afternoon, I drove into town to pick up groceries for our traditional fish fry dinner. I'd been planning this meal for weeks, remembering how much Timothy loved helping his grandfather prepare the fish and how proud he'd been to learn the secret seasoning recipe. The local market was busy with summer tourists, and what should have been a quick trip stretched into nearly 2 hours as I chatted with longtime locals who remembered my husband fondly. Driving back up the winding mountain road, I felt lighter than I had all week. Maybe tonight would be different. Maybe the fish fry would recreate some of that old magic and bring us all together the way these traditions were meant to do. I'd bought Timothy's favorite root beer and even splurged on the expensive ice cream he loved for dessert. As I pulled into the gravel driveway, I could hear voices carrying across the water. The afternoon was unusually quiet, with no boat motors or other families around, so sound traveled clearly from the house to the parking area. I grabbed the first bag of groceries, planning to make multiple trips, when Jennifer's voice cut through the peaceful air like a knife. "She's not your real grandma." The words hit me with such force that I nearly dropped the paper bag I was carrying. I froze beside my car, hidden behind the large pine trees that bordered the driveway. Every instinct told me to walk away to give them privacy, but my feet wouldn't move. Timothy's small voice responded with the kind of confusion that only children can express. "But she makes me pancakes like Grandpa did, and she knows all the stories about the fish in the lake." "Listen to me, Timothy." Jennifer's voice carried that particular tone mothers use when they're trying to be patient but firm. "Margaret was only married to your grandfather for 3 years. 3 years? She's not your real grandmother. She's just someone who happened to marry into our family." I pressed my back against the car, my heart pounding so loud I was afraid they might hear it. The grocery bag crinkled in my trembling hands as I tried to process what I was hearing. "But I love Grandma Margaret," Timothy said, and I could hear the tears starting in his voice. "She teaches me things, and she hugs me when I'm sad." "That's nice, sweetheart, but you need to understand the difference between real family and other people. Your real grandmother was your grandfather's first wife, the one who died before you were born. Margaret is she's just someone who was around for a little while." The casual cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. I felt like I'd been physically slapped. 3 years of marriage suddenly reduced to just someone who was around for a little while. 3 years of loving her husband, of supporting his business decisions, of welcoming his family into my heart and home. "Why doesn't Daddy tell me this?" Timothy asked his 8-year-old mind, trying to make sense of family complexities that even adults struggled with. "Your father doesn't like to hurt people's feelings. He lets Margaret think she's more important to our family than she really is. But I think you're old enough to understand the truth. When we go home, things are going to be different. We need to create some space. Some boundaries." The word boundaries sent a chill down my spine. I realized I was hearing the planning of my systematic exclusion from Timothy's life. All those little rejections over the past few days suddenly made perfect sense. This wasn't spontaneous frustration. This was a calculated campaign. "I don't want things to be different," Timothy said, his voice breaking. "I like when Grandma Margaret reads to me. She does the funny voices for all the characters." "Timothy, you're going to have to grow up a little bit here. Margaret has her own life, her own family somewhere else. She's not really part of ours. The sooner you understand that, the easier it will be for everyone." I heard Timothy start to cry, really cry, with the deep sobs that children produce when their world suddenly doesn't make sense anymore. Instead of comfort, Jennifer's response was swift and dismissive. Stop crying. You're 8 years old, not a baby. Go wash your face and don't mention this conversation to your father or Margaret. This is between you and me, do you understand? The sound of the screen door slamming told me the conversation was over, but I remained frozen behind the car for several more minutes. My hands were shaking so badly I couldn't grip the grocery bag properly. The beautiful afternoon had turned into a nightmare, and I felt like I was seeing my life through completely different eyes. Every interaction over the past 3 years was suddenly suspect. Every family gathering, every holiday celebration, every moment I'd thought we were building genuine relationships now felt like an elaborate performance for my benefit. How long had Jennifer felt this way? Had Robert shared these sentiments? Was I truly just an interloper who had overstayed her welcome? The most devastating part was realizing that my love for Timothy, which felt as real and powerful as any biological grandparent's love, was being systematically poisoned. That little boy was being taught to see our relationship as artificial, temporary, and ultimately meaningless. The bedtime stories, the fishing lessons, the quiet moments of connection that had sustained me through my grief were apparently nothing more than uncomfortable obligations to be endured. I finally managed to gather the groceries and walk toward the house, my mind racing with hurt anger and a growing determination that Jennifer had severely underestimated exactly who she was dealing with. Walking into the house felt like entering enemy territory. The familiar lake house with its knotty pine walls and family photos spanning decades suddenly felt foreign and hostile. Jennifer was in the kitchen calmly preparing what looked like a snack for Timothy, as if she hadn't just delivered a crushing blow to an 8-year-old's understanding of family love. "Oh, you're back," she said with that practiced smile that I now recognized as completely hollow. "Timothy was asking about you. He seemed a little upset about something, but you know how children can be emotional over nothing." The casual gaslighting was breathtaking. She was already rewriting the narrative, preparing to deny the conversation I'd overheard if Timothy mentioned it. I set the groceries on the counter with more force than necessary, my hands still trembling with suppressed emotion. "Where is Timothy now?" I managed to ask, proud of how steady my voice sounded despite the storm raging inside me. "Playing video games in the den. He said he didn't want to go swimming this afternoon." She paused, studying my face carefully. "Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale." The concern in her voice was perfectly performed, but I could see something else in her eyes now. A calculating quality that I'd missed before, or maybe hadn't wanted to see. How long had she been studying me like this, measuring my reactions and planning her strategies? Timothy appeared in the kitchen doorway, his eyes red-rimmed and his usual bright energy completely absent. When he saw me, his face crumpled slightly, and I could see him trying to process his mother's words alongside his genuine feelings for me. "Hi, Grandma Margaret," he said quietly, and I heard the confusion in his voice. The natural enthusiasm he usually showed when I returned from errands was gone, replaced by an awkward uncertainty that broke my heart. "Hello, sweetheart," I replied, keeping my voice gentle and warm despite the pain I felt. "I got your favorite root beer for tonight's fish fry. Would you like to help me prepare the batter like we planned?" He glanced at his mother, and I saw the moment of hesitation that had never existed before. Jennifer's expression remained neutral, but there was something predatory in her stillness, like she was waiting to see how her earlier words had taken effect. "I think Timothy might be getting a bit too old for cooking activities," she interjected smoothly. "He's been saying he'd rather spend time with kids his own age instead of always hanging around adults." The lie was so bold and so cruel that I felt my breath catch. Timothy's face showed his confusion clearly, his 8-year-old honesty warring with his mother's expectations. I realized I was watching the systematic destruction of our relationship in real time. Robert chose that moment to walk in from his afternoon conference call, completely oblivious to the emotional warfare happening in his own family. He kissed Jennifer's cheek and ruffled Timothy's hair with the casual affection of someone who had no idea his wife was busy poisoning family relationships. "How was the grocery run, Margaret? Get everything we need for the famous fish fry." His smile was genuine and warm, making the contrast with his wife's behavior even more stark. "I think so," I replied, forcing normalcy into my voice. "Timothy was going to help me with the batter preparation." "That sounds great. Timothy loves cooking with you." He looked down at his son, missing the boy's conflicted expression entirely. "Don't you, buddy?" Timothy nodded uncertainly, and I saw Jennifer's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. She was losing control of the narrative she'd tried to establish, and she didn't like it. That evening's dinner was torture. I went through the motions of preparing the fish fry, but Timothy's participation was stilted and uncomfortable. He kept looking at his mother for approval before responding to my questions or suggestions. The easy conversation and shared laughter that had characterized our previous cooking sessions was replaced by an awkward formality that made my chest ache. During dinner, I found myself analyzing every interaction with new eyes. When Robert complimented the meal and mentioned how much his father had loved this recipe, Jennifer quickly changed the subject. When Timothy started to tell a story about something his grandfather had taught him, she redirected his attention to his food. Every attempt at connection was subtly but systematically undermined. The most painful moment came during dessert. Timothy had always been allowed to sit next to me during meals, often leaning against my arm while he ate his ice cream and told me about his day. Tonight, Jennifer efficiently orchestrated the seating so that he was positioned between her and Robert, with me isolated at the end of the table like an unwelcome afterthought. "Timothy, tell your father about the swimming lessons you want to take when we get home," she prompted, and I realized she was deliberately filling the conversation with topics and activities that excluded me. Future plans that I wouldn't be part of, interests that didn't involve their visits to my house, experiences that would create new memories without me in them. Robert, still completely oblivious, enthusiastically engaged with these conversations, never noticing how each topic was carefully chosen to emphasize my outsider status. I sat there eating ice cream that tasted like cardboard, listening to my family plan a future that apparently didn't include me. After dinner, when I offered to read Timothy his bedtime story, Jennifer smoothly intervened with a reminder about an early morning planned activity that required extra sleep. When I suggested a quick game of cards, she remembered urgent packing that needed to be done. Every traditional connection point was blocked with reasonable-sounding excuses that couldn't be challenged without seeming petty or unreasonable. That night, I lay in my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling more alone than I had since my husband's funeral. The house felt different now, less like a home, and more like a place where I was temporarily tolerated. The family photos on my dresser seemed to mock me with their images of happier times that I now suspected had been more one-sided than I'd realized. I thought about the past 3 years, about all the holidays and celebrations and quiet family moments that I'd treasured. How many of those had Jennifer endured rather than enjoyed? How often had she smiled to my face while planning ways to minimize my influence and importance in Timothy's life? The worst part was the growing realization that Robert either didn't see what was happening or didn't care enough to address it. His wife was systematically excluding his stepmother from family life, and he was completely failing to protect the relationship between Timothy and the woman who had loved his father and was trying to love his son. As I listened to the quiet sounds of the lake house settling for the night, I made a decision that would change everything. Jennifer had severely underestimated who she was dealing with, and it was time for her to learn exactly how much power she'd been casually dismissing. 3 years of marriage might seem insignificant to her, but those 3 years had given me access to information and resources that she couldn't possibly imagine. I woke before dawn with absolute clarity about what needed to happen next. The hurt and confusion of the previous day had crystallized overnight into something much more powerful: strategic determination. Jennifer had shown her true colors, and now it was time for her to discover exactly who Margaret really was beneath the gentle, accommodating grandmother facade. My first call was to David Chen, my late husband's longtime attorney and the executor of his estate. David had known both my husband and me for over 20 years, long before our marriage, and he understood better than anyone the true scope of the business empire we'd built together. "Margaret, it's early even for you," David said when he answered on the second ring. "Is everything all right at the lake house?" "I need to discuss some estate matters, David, privately and immediately." My voice carried a tone he hadn't heard from me since the intense negotiations we'd handled during my husband's final months. "How quickly can you get me detailed financial statements for all the hidden assets?" There was a pause as David processed the implications of my request. Are we talking about the offshore accounts and the private equity investments, the ones that weren't disclosed in the standard probate documents? All of it. Every single asset that wasn't public knowledge when he died. I need documentation of the current values, and I need to understand my complete control over disbursement decisions. Within an hour, David had emailed me a confidential financial summary that made even me gasp at the numbers. My husband had been far more successful than even I had fully realized. The publicly known assets that had gone through probate were substantial, but they represented less than half of his true wealth. The private technology investments, the real estate holdings, the cryptocurrency portfolios he'd quietly accumulated over decades of prescient investing had grown exponentially since his death. The most significant revelation was a private equity fund he'd established, but never told anyone about. Not even Robert. It had been specifically designed to benefit Timothy's education and future, but the disbursement was entirely at my discretion. The fund alone was worth over $20 million, and that was just the beginning. My second call was to Miranda Walsh, my financial advisor, and someone who'd known me since long before I became wealthy. Miranda had watched me transform from a middle-class widow into a savvy investor and business partner, and she understood both my generous nature and my backbone of steel. Miranda, I need you to prepare a comprehensive presentation about my complete financial portfolio. Everything. I want charts, graphs, and documentation that clearly show the scope of assets under my control. Margaret, that's going to be a substantial document. Are we talking about estate planning or something else? Something else entirely. I need to educate some family members about the reality of their situation. Can you have everything ready by tomorrow evening? Miranda's laugh carried a note of anticipation. Someone underestimated you, didn't they? This should be interesting. I'll have everything prepared, and I'll include the inheritance planning documents we discussed last year. The inheritance planning documents were particularly relevant. After my husband's death, I'd worked with both David and Miranda to create a comprehensive plan for distributing assets based on demonstrated family values and relationships. The plan included specific provisions for Timothy's future, but it also included clauses about respect inclusion and the treatment of family members. My husband had insisted on those clauses, having witnessed too many wealthy families torn apart by greed and manipulation. I spent the morning walking the lake property, remembering conversations my husband and I had had about family legacy and values. He'd been very clear that money should strengthen family bonds, not create division, and he'd trusted me completely to make decisions that reflected those values. He'd also warned me that wealth sometimes revealed people's true character in unpleasant ways. "You're stronger than you know, Margaret," he'd told me during one of our last conversations. "Don't let anyone make you feel small or unimportant. You've earned your place in this family and in this world." By afternoon, I was reviewing financial statements and legal documents that painted a very different picture of my situation than Jennifer apparently understood. I wasn't just a widow living on a comfortable inheritance. I was the sole controller of a financial empire worth over $50 million, with complete discretion over how and when those assets would be distributed to future generations. The most satisfying discovery was the education trust fund my husband had established for Timothy. It was structured in a way that required my approval for any disbursements, and it included provisions about family harmony and respect for all family members. Jennifer's behavior wasn't just personally hurtful, it was potentially disqualifying according to the trust's explicit terms. I called the Sagamore Resort the most elegant restaurant in the area and made reservations for 5 people the following evening. The Sagamore had been my husband's favorite restaurant, the place where he'd proposed to me 3 years earlier, and it felt symbolically perfect for what I was planning. "I'd like your private dining room," I told the manager, "and I'll need the room set up for a business presentation. I'll be sharing some important family announcements." That evening at dinner, I began laying the groundwork for the next day's revelation. I mentioned my phone calls with lawyers and financial advisors, watching Jennifer's eyes sharpen with interest. When I casually referenced meetings about estate planning and inheritance decisions, her attention became laser-focused. "Are you thinking about updating your will, Margaret?" she asked with carefully modulated casualness. "I'm always thinking about legacy planning," I replied smoothly. My husband taught me that money should reflect values, and values should be demonstrated through actions and respect. Robert looked up from his phone, finally tuning into the conversation. That sounds like Dad. He always said character mattered more than blood when it came to family. I saw Jennifer's slight flinch at that comment, and I filed it away for future reference. She was beginning to sense that something was shifting, but she had no idea of the scope of what she'd triggered with her cruelty to Timothy. I've arranged a special dinner for tomorrow night at the Sagamore, I announced, a celebration of family and an opportunity to discuss some important decisions I've been making. Jennifer's smile was bright and predatory. She clearly believed she was about to be rewarded for her years of polite tolerance. She had no idea she was about to receive the education of her lifetime about respect consequences and the true meaning of family power. Friday evening arrived with the kind of perfect summer weather that made the Adirondacks legendary. The drive to the Sagamore Resort took us along Lake George's shoreline, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and rose. Jennifer had dressed for the occasion in an expensive silk dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent, her jewelry carefully chosen to suggest sophisticated affluence. She was clearly expecting this to be a memorable evening, just not in the way it would actually unfold. The Sagamore's private dining room overlooked the lake, with floor-to-ceiling windows that provided a breathtaking view of the water and mountains. I'd requested specific seating arrangements, a round table that put everyone at eye level with me, positioned where I could see everyone's faces clearly when I made my announcements. The presentation materials were already set up on a side table, covered with a cloth, and waiting for the right moment. "This is absolutely beautiful, Margaret," Robert said as we were seated, his genuine appreciation warming my heart. "Dad would have loved this." "He proposed to me at this restaurant," I replied, watching Jennifer's face carefully. "At that table right over there by the window. He said he wanted our engagement to have a view worthy of our future together." Timothy was unusually quiet, still processing the confusion his mother had created about our relationship. He sat between his parents, occasionally glancing at me with the kind of uncertainty that made my chest ache. Tonight would change everything for him, but I hoped it would ultimately restore the security and love he deserved to feel. The sommelier presented a bottle of champagne vintage Dom Perignon that I'd specifically requested. Jennifer's eyes lit up at the sight of the expensive bottle, and I could practically see her calculating the cost and significance. She was interpreting every luxury as a sign of her impending good fortune. "Are we celebrating something special tonight?" she asked, her voice carefully modulated to sound appropriately curious rather than greedy. "We are indeed," I replied, allowing the suspense to build naturally. "But let's enjoy our dinner first. Some conversations deserve the proper setting and timing." The meal progressed with carefully orchestrated conversation. I shared stories about my late husband's business acumen, his investment strategies, and his philosophy about wealth and family responsibility. Jennifer hung on every word occasionally, asking questions that revealed her keen interest in financial details. Robert contributed memories of his father's work ethic and success, completely unaware of the undercurrents flowing around the table. "Your grandfather was incredibly smart about money," I told Timothy during the main course. "He taught me that wealth isn't just about having money, it's about using it wisely and sharing it with people who understand its value and respect what it represents." "What does it represent, Grandma Margaret?" Timothy asked, his 8-year-old curiosity temporarily overcoming his mother's attempts to create distance between us. "Family loyalty, respect for one another, and taking care of the people who truly matter in your life," I replied, making sure Jennifer understood that every word was deliberate. As dessert was served, I noticed Jennifer's growing anticipation. She kept glancing at the covered presentation materials, clearly expecting some kind of formal announcement about inheritances or gifts. Her performance of loving family member was reaching Academy Award levels of commitment. "Timothy," I said, drawing his attention with the gentle tone I'd always used with him. "Do you remember the stories your grandfather used to tell about building his business from nothing?" He nodded eagerly momentarily, forgetting his confusion in the excitement of remembering his grandfather. "He said he started in a garage and worked really, really hard every day." "That's right. And he also said that the most important thing wasn't making money, but making sure the money went to people who would honor his memory and values. People who understood that family is about love and respect, not just blood relations. I saw Jennifer shift slightly in her seat, perhaps beginning to sense that this conversation wasn't heading in the direction she'd anticipated. Robert remained blissfully unaware, smiling at the memory of his father's stories. The moment had arrived. I stood up and walked to the side table, removing the cloth from Miranda's carefully prepared presentation materials. The first chart showed a financial summary that made Jennifer's eyes widen dramatically. The numbers were far larger than she could have imagined. I wanted to share some information with all of you tonight. I began, my voice steady and clear. Information about your grandfather's true estate and the decisions I've been making about its distribution. Jennifer's breathing had become noticeably shallow as she stared at the financial charts. $53 million in total assets, private equity funds, real estate portfolios, investment accounts that had grown exponentially since my husband's death. This wasn't the comfortable middle-class inheritance she'd assumed I was managing. These assets are currently under my complete control. I continued, letting that fact sink in fully. Every disbursement decision, every inheritance allocation, every trust fund distribution requires my approval and my signature alone. Robert was staring at the numbers in shock. Margaret, I had no idea Dad had accumulated this much wealth. This is life-changing money. It certainly is, I agreed, preparing for the devastating blow I was about to deliver. And your father was very specific about his wishes for how these assets should be distributed. He created detailed guidelines about family values, respect, and the treatment of all family members. Jennifer's face had gone pale, but her eyes remained fixed on the financial statements with laser focus. She was doing rapid calculations, probably planning how this windfall would change her lifestyle and social status. The largest single asset is a $23 million education and future trust fund established specifically for Timothy, I announced, watching as Jennifer's pupils dilated with greed and excitement. This was the moment I'd been building toward, the moment when Jennifer would reveal her true character completely and provide me with the perfect opportunity to teach her a lesson she would never forget. The trap was set, and she was about to walk directly into it. However, I continued, my voice taking on the steel that Jennifer was hearing for the first time, there are very specific conditions attached to every single dollar of this inheritance. I moved to the next chart, which outlined the detailed behavioral and relationship requirements my husband had insisted upon when structuring these trusts. Jennifer's confident expression began to waver as she realized this wasn't going to be the straightforward windfall she'd anticipated. My late husband was very clear that money should strengthen family bonds, not create division. He specifically required that all beneficiaries demonstrate ongoing respect for family relationships, including step relationships and chosen family bonds. I paused, letting the implications sink in. He was particularly concerned about protecting family members who might be vulnerable to exclusion or disrespect. Robert looked confused, but Jennifer's face had gone from pale to ashen. She was beginning to understand that her behavior had consequences she hadn't anticipated. Yesterday afternoon, I said, my voice carrying across the private dining room with crystalline clarity. I overheard a conversation between Jennifer and Timothy where she explained that I am not his real grandmother, that I was just someone who happened to marry into the family for a brief time, and that Timothy needed to understand I was not truly part of your family. The silence that followed was deafening. Robert's face went through a series of emotions, shock, confusion, and then growing anger as he processed what I'd revealed. Timothy looked between his parents with the wide-eyed terror of a child who realizes the adults in his life are in serious conflict. She told an 8-year-old boy that the woman who has loved him, cared for him, and tried to honor his grandfather's memory was essentially a stranger with no real claim to family connection. My voice remained steady, but the pain underneath was unmistakable. Jennifer finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "Margaret, you don't understand the context." "I understand perfectly." I cut her off. I understand that you've been systematically undermining my relationship with Timothy. I understand that you consider 3 years of marriage to be insignificant. I understand that you view me as an obstacle to be managed rather than a family member to be respected. I turned to the final chart, the one that would deliver the devastating blow Jennifer had unknowingly arranged for herself. Based on these demonstrated values and this clear disrespect for family bonds, I have made some decisions about inheritance distributions. I paused, watching Jennifer's face as the reality began to dawn on her. Timothy's $23 million trust fund requires ongoing family harmony and respect for all family members as a condition of disbursement. Specifically, it requires that all guardians and parents demonstrate inclusive family values and protection of vulnerable family relationships. Jennifer's hands were literally shaking as she gripped the edge of the table. The numbers on those charts represented more money than she'd ever dreamed of having access to, and it was slipping away from her in real time. Furthermore, I continued relentlessly, the additional $15 million in educational and support trusts that were designated for Robert's family are similarly conditional on demonstrated family values and respect for all family members, including step relationships. Robert finally found his voice. "Jennifer, what exactly did you say to Timothy, and why didn't you tell me about any of this?" But before Jennifer could respond, I delivered the final devastating blow. I have decided to restructure the inheritance based on demonstrated character and family values. Timothy's trust fund will remain intact, but it will now be administered through a foundation that prioritizes genuine family relationships and respect for all family members. Jennifer's behavior has disqualified her from any advisory or management role in these decisions. The words hit Jennifer like physical blows. Her face crumpled as she realized the full scope of what her cruelty had cost her family. The designer dress, the expensive jewelry, the entire lifestyle she'd been anticipating was disappearing before her eyes. Additionally, I said, delivering the knockout punch, I am establishing a new trust that will specifically benefit family members who demonstrate ongoing love, respect, and inclusion toward all family relationships. This trust will be worth approximately $12 million and will provide lifetime support for family members who truly understand what it means to love unconditionally. Jennifer made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. The room spun around her as she processed the magnitude of her mistake. She had systematically destroyed her own family's financial future through her cruelty and exclusion. "Margaret, please," she whispered, her voice breaking completely. "I didn't mean... I was just trying to help Timothy understand. Understand that love can be withdrawn, that family connections are temporary, that respect is optional." My voice was quiet but implacable. "You were teaching that boy that the woman who reads him bedtime stories, who teaches him to fish, who loves him unconditionally, is disposable and unimportant." The devastating truth hung in the air like a physical presence. Jennifer had not just been cruel to me. She had been cruel to a child, teaching him that love was conditional and family bonds were fragile. She had poisoned his sense of security and belonging for the sake of her own petty jealousies and insecurities. "I can change," Jennifer said desperately, tears streaming down her face. "I can fix this. I didn't understand how much money was involved." I finished coldly. "That's exactly the problem, Jennifer. Your apology isn't about the pain you caused Timothy or the disrespect you showed me. It's about the financial consequences you're now facing." At that moment, the weight of her mistakes hit Jennifer with full force. She had gambled her family's entire financial future on her assumption that I was powerless and unimportant. She had lost everything through her own cruelty and arrogance. The room tilted sickeningly around her, and she collapsed forward onto the table unconscious from the shock of her devastating miscalculation. The weeks that followed that dramatic dinner were a period of profound change for our entire family. Jennifer's fainting spell had been brief, but it marked the beginning of a complete transformation in family dynamics. Robert finally awakened to his wife's behavior, and its consequences insisted on family counseling and serious conversations about respect, inclusion, and the values they wanted to teach Timothy. Jennifer's initial apologies were desperate attempts to undo financial damage, but as the reality of her situation settled in, something deeper began to emerge. Stripped of her assumptions about easy wealth and forced to confront the pain she'd caused, she began the difficult work of examining her own insecurities and prejudices about step-family relationships. The counseling sessions were sometimes brutal in their honesty. Jennifer had to face the fact that her exclusion of me stemmed from her own fears about Timothy's loyalty and love. She'd been threatened by the genuine bond between us, worried that his affection for me somehow diminished her importance as his mother. Her attempts to create distance had been driven by jealousy and possessiveness rather than any real concern for Timothy's well-being. Timothy, bless his resilient 8-year-old heart, adapted to the changing family dynamics with the flexibility that children possess. The counselor helped him understand that adults sometimes make mistakes when they're scared or confused, and that love isn't diminished by being shared among multiple people. Our bedtime story sessions resumed, but now they included conversations about different types of families and how love can exist in many forms. 3 months after that pivotal dinner, Jennifer made a genuine breakthrough. She came to my house alone without Robert or Timothy and sat in my living room with tears streaming down her face. "I need to apologize to you properly," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "Not because of the money, but because I was cruel to someone who loved my son. I was cruel to you when you were grieving and trying to find your place in our family. I was teaching Timothy that love was conditional and family bonds were fragile. I don't know how to undo that damage." It was the first apology that felt genuine, rooted in understanding rather than desperation. We talked for hours that day about loss, fear, family dynamics, and the courage it takes to love someone else's child as your own. Jennifer admitted that she'd felt threatened by my confidence, my financial independence, and the easy relationship I'd built with Timothy. "I thought if I could minimize your importance, Timothy wouldn't be torn between loving me and loving you," she confessed. "I didn't understand that love multiplies rather than divides." The financial restructuring I'd announced that night at the Sagamore wasn't entirely permanent. Working with David and Miranda, I created a path for Jennifer and Robert to demonstrate genuine change and earn back their roles in Timothy's inheritance planning. It would require years of consistent behavior, ongoing family counseling, and demonstrated commitment to inclusive family values, but the opportunity existed. More importantly, I established the foundation I'd mentioned, focusing on supporting blended families and step relationships. Jennifer volunteered to work with the foundation, using her experience and hard-learned lessons to help other families navigate similar challenges. Her work became a form of ongoing accountability and service that gradually rebuilt trust within our family. Robert stepped up in ways I hadn't expected, taking responsibility for his failure to protect family relationships and actively working to repair the damage. He instituted regular family meetings, created traditions that specifically honored both biological and chosen family bonds, and made sure Timothy understood that love comes in many forms, all equally valid and important. The most beautiful change was in Timothy himself. Free from his mother's attempts to limit his affections, he blossomed into a confident, loving child who understood that having multiple people care for him made him richer, not more divided. He became our little ambassador of inclusive love, naturally extending kindness to everyone in his expanding definition of family. As I sit here now, 2 years later, watching Timothy help Jennifer prepare dinner in my kitchen while they plan his upcoming birthday party, I'm struck by the power of consequence and forgiveness working together. The money was never really the point. It was simply the tool that revealed everyone's true character and provided the leverage needed to demand change. My husband was right when he structured those trusts with character requirements. He understood that wealth without wisdom is meaningless, and that family bonds must be built on respect and genuine love rather than obligation or financial incentive. The inheritance Timothy will eventually receive comes with the knowledge that it was preserved through the protection of family values rather than the pursuit of financial gain. I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't require cruelty or revenge. It requires clarity about your worth and the courage to enforce consequences for disrespectful behavior. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do for someone is to show them the true cost of their choices, allowing them the opportunity to grow and change. Jennifer learned that family relationships require ongoing investment and that love shared doesn't diminish but multiplies. She discovered that her own insecurities were more threatening to her family's happiness than any outside relationship could ever be. Robert learned that passive acceptance of harmful behavior makes him complicit in that harm, and that protecting family relationships requires active participation and courage. Most importantly, Timothy learned that he is worthy of love from multiple sources, that family comes in many forms, and that respect and kindness are the foundations upon which all lasting relationships are built. The lake house has returned to being a place of joy and genuine connection. Last summer's reunion was filled with the kind of authentic laughter and shared activities that I dreamed of when we first started these family traditions. Jennifer now organizes activities that specifically include me, and she's teaching Timothy to appreciate the different perspectives and experiences that each family member brings to their shared story. I often think about that moment when I heard Jennifer's cruel words, and I'm grateful for the painful clarity it provided. Without understanding the true scope of the problem, I couldn't have addressed it effectively. Sometimes the most hurtful revelations are also the most necessary ones. The $53 million estate continues to grow, managed with the same careful attention to values and character that my husband insisted upon. But more importantly, the family it was meant to serve has grown stronger, more inclusive, and more genuinely loving than ever before. True wealth isn't measured in dollars, it's measured in relationships built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the courage to love without conditions. That's the legacy I hope to leave Timothy, and it's worth far more than any financial inheritance could ever be. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever faced challenges in a blended family situation? How did you handle conflicts about family roles and relationships? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about family respect and finding strength in difficult situations. Don't forget to share this with anyone who might benefit from hearing about the power of standing up for yourself while maintaining grace and dignity. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it reminds you that you're never too old to learn, grow, and demand the respect you deserve. May your own family relationships be filled with genuine love, mutual respect, and the kind of understanding that makes everyone feel truly valued and included.